The high-altitude spires of the royal palace of Ethelgard did not pierce the clouds. They commanded them. Built from shimmering blocks of white solarium stone that absorbed the violet light of the binary suns, the palace was a masterpiece of galactic architecture, suspended 3,000 meters above the swirling ammonia storms of the capital world. Within the private royal residential wing, the air was pristine, chilled to a precise 21 degrees Celsius, and perfumed with the scent of crushed crystalline orchids. Princess Lyra of the House of Vaelia stood by the floor-to-ceiling quartz balcony doors, her slender, ethereal frame draped in robes of spun starlight. Her skin possessed a translucent, pearl-like iridescence, and her 4 delicate, crystalline horns caught the dimming dual sunlight, casting fractured prisms of indigo and gold across the polished obsidian floor. She was the last living heir to the Vaelia dynasty, a royal bloodline that had governed the Orion Trade Federation for 4 millennia. And tonight she was entirely, catastrophically alone. Or so she thought. The first indication of intrusion wasn't a sound. In the rarefied atmosphere of the upper spires, sound traveled differently. It was a microscopic shift in barometric pressure. A sudden, unnatural drop of 3 millibars that signaled the heavy security baffles of the private antechamber had been bypassed with cold, silent efficiency. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. Her translucent skin flushed a deep, warning violet. She turned sharply away from the balcony, her hands flying to her throat where her royal activation torque rested. But before her slender fingers could brush the emergency beacon, the heavy double doors of her bedchamber didn't swing open. They imploded. A silent, concussive pulse of subsonic energy sheared the reinforced titanium hinges clean off the frame. The massive doors crashed inward, splintering against the obsidian floor in a cloud of microscopic metallic dust. Through the settling haze stepped the shadows. They were not common thugs or planetary mercenaries. They were the Whisper Guild, an elite, genetically engineered syndicate of shadow assassins from the jagged, high-gravity trenches of the Carthian Reach. Clad in absorption-weave cloaks that bent light around their skeletal frames, they moved with a horrifying, liquid grace. 4 of them glided into the room, their elongated limbs ending in multi-segmented monomolecular blades that hummed with a low, deadly frequency, cutting through the ambient air with invisible heat. Lyra backed away until her spine pressed hard against the cold quartz glass of the balcony doors. Her heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against her ribs. She tried to cry out, to project a telepathic distress pulse across the palace network. But the lead assassin raised a secondary wrist projector, flooding the room with a localized dampening field that choked the airwaves into absolute silence. The lead assassin, a towering Carthian whose scarred, chitinous face was half hidden beneath a cowl of rippling darkness, stepped forward. His quad-articulated jaw parted in a hideous, clicking smile. "Princess Lyra," the assassin hissed, his voice sounding like dry leaves grating across gravglass. "The Vaelia dynasty ends tonight. No guards. No alarms. Just the quiet dark." He raised his monomolecular blade, the humming edge glowing a faint, sinister crimson as he drew back his arm for a clean, decapitating strike. Lyra closed her eyes, her pearl-like skin turning pale as ash, her mind bracing for the searing bite of thermal steel. The strike never came. Instead of the hiss of flesh parting under high-frequency plasma, the entire bedchamber reverberated with a sound so profoundly mundane, so utterly out of place in the opulent silence of the royal spire, that even the elite assassins froze mid-stride. It was the sound of a heavy, oil-stained rubber boot stepping on a loose floorboard in the outer service corridor, followed immediately by the heavy, echoing scrape of an aluminum toolbox dragging across the polished solarium stone. The lead assassin's head snapped toward the shattered doorway, his optical sensors flaring in sudden, tactical irritation. What primitive anomaly approaches? Eliminate it. 2 of the shadow assassins spun away from Lyra, their absorption cloaks rippling as they dissolved into the darkness of the doorway, raising their monomolecular blades to butcher whatever unfortunate servant or automated sanitation unit had stumbled into the restricted wing. A second passed. Then, a low, gravelly sigh echoed from the corridor. A sound dripping with the profound, soul-crushing irritation of a man whose midnight shift had just been interrupted by bureaucratic incompetence. Unbelievable. A dry, raspy human voice muttered from the shadows. Third time this week the primary pressure valve on the atmospheric scrubber has tripped because some royal aristocrat left the balcony doors open to look at the pretty purple lights. Through the shattered remnants of the doorway walked the human. He didn't wear powered armor. He didn't carry an energy rifle, a particle disruptor, or a high-frequency blade. He wore a faded, oil-stained navy blue canvas jumpsuit with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with thick, rope-like muscle and crisscrossed with white, jagged industrial burn scars. On his head sat a battered gray baseball cap pulled low over his brow, shadowing a pair of tired, bloodshot brown eyes. In his right hand, he carried a 20-inch iron pry bar, its curved tip caked in dried grease. In his left hand, he held a half-empty mug of lukewarm, chemically reconstituted black coffee that was steaming faintly in the cool palace air. This was Master Chief Facility Maintenance Technician Marcus Vance, assigned to the Royal Wing for 3 solar cycles, and currently wishing he was anywhere else in the galaxy. The 2 Carthian assassins materialized from the darkness on either side of him, their blades flashing in a blinding X-formation designed to sever his head and torso simultaneously before he even registered their presence. Marcus didn't look up from his coffee. With a motion so casually practiced it looked like a reflex, Marcus took a slow, unhurried sip from his mug, sidestepped 3 inches to the left, and casually swung his heavy iron pry bar in a short, brutal arc. The heavy iron tip struck the first assassin directly across the intersection of his cervical vertebrae with the bone-shattering force of a falling freight elevator. There was a wet, sickening crunch of shattering chitin as the assassin dropped instantly like a severed puppet, crashing face first onto the floor and sending his monomolecular blade clattering harmlessly across the tiles. Before the second assassin could adjust his trajectory, Marcus caught the alien's momentum with his hip, hooked his heavy work boot behind the Carthian's knee, and drove his elbow down into the creature's shoulder blade with a sharp, explosive grunt. The second assassin hit the floor right beside his comrade, twitching once before going entirely limp. Marcus let out a long, weary sigh, steam rising from his coffee mug as he blew across the surface. He looked down at the 2 unconscious, bleeding apex assassins lying at his feet, then looked up through the shattered doorway into the royal bedchamber. He locked eyes with the lead assassin, who stood frozen with his blade hovering inches from the terrified Princess Lyra. The lead assassin's multi-lensed optical clusters dilated in sheer, paralyzed disbelief. His mandibles twitched in an erratic, confused panic. What are you?" the Carthian hissed, his voice dropping an octave as he slowly lowered his blade away from the princess's throat, turning his entire terrifying focus toward the scruffy human in the blue jumpsuit. No automated defense grid registered your approach. No life sign dampener could conceal an organic heartbeat from our sensors. Marcus took another deliberate sip of his coffee, winced because it was getting bitter, and wiped his mouth with the back of his oil-stained forearm. Your life sign dampeners only work on carbon silicate life forms that regulate their body temperature within standard bioparameters, Marcus said flatly, his voice raspy and devoid of fear. My suit's internal thermal regulation lining is backed with lead-lined asbestos leftover from a hull patch on sublevel 9. Plus, I was chewing mint gum. Your sensors thought I was a leaking ventilation pipe. The assassin bared his teeth, his grip tightening on his monomolecular blade. You interfere with the sovereign right of the shadow. You are a civilian contractor. Step away from the royal target, hairless ape, or your entire species will be harvested for fertilizer. Marcus stopped. He slowly lowered his coffee mug to his side, his tired brown eyes narrowing slightly. Hold on, Marcus muttered, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register that made the hairs on the back of Princess Lyra's neck stand up. Did you just call me a civilian contractor? I called you a corpse, the assassin snarled, lunging forward with blinding, superhuman speed, bringing his glowing blade down in a vertical bisection arc designed to carve the human cleanly in half. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't run, he didn't panic, and he didn't drop his coffee. With the casual, fluid grace of a man dodging a falling wrench on an oil rig, Marcus stepped inside the assassin's reach, ducked beneath the searing plasma arc, and drove the heavy, curved claw of his iron pry bar directly into the chest plate seam of the Carthian's absorption armor. The pry bar punctured the pressurized life support bladder beneath the assassin's armor with a violent hiss of escaping nitrogen. Marcus twisted the iron bar 2 inches to the left, caught the assassin by the back of his cowl, and drove his knee upward with the full torsional force of his hips and shoulders. The Carthian's armored chest caved inward with a sickening metallic shriek. The assassin flew backward through the air, crashing through the remaining glass balcony doors and tumbling out into the 3,000-meter drop toward the ammonia storms below, disappearing into the violet clouds without a sound. The fourth and final assassin, realizing the mathematical impossibility of what he was witnessing, dropped his weapon, turned tail, and bolted for the shattered doorway. "Hey," Marcus called out, his voice echoing flatly down the hall. The assassin froze. "Pick up your garbage on your way out." Marcus sighed, pointing with his pry bar toward the 2 unconscious assassins twitching on the floor. "And tell your syndicate boss that if anyone breaks my atmospheric seals again before my shift ends at midnight, I'm personally going to disconnect the power grid to your sector." The remaining assassin didn't look back. He scrambled over the broken titanium doorframe and vanished down the corridor in a blur of absolute terror. The royal bedchamber fell into a profound, suffocating silence. The only sound was the gentle hum of the automated cleaning drones, slowly beginning to emerge from the baseboards to sweep up the glass dust. Princess Lyra stood frozen against the balcony frame, her pearl-like skin glowing with a brilliant, pulsing violet light of sheer, unadulterated shock. She looked down at the unconscious assassins, then slowly turned her gaze toward the small, scruffy human standing in the center of the room. Marcus sighed, lifted his coffee mug, took a sip, and grimaced. "Lukewarm," he muttered to himself. He turned his tired eyes toward the trembling alien princess, giving her a brief, polite nod of professional acknowledgement. "Evening, Your Highness," Marcus said, his voice entirely monotone. "Do me a favor. Next time you want to have a late-night visitor, try to use the front intercom. Some of us are trying to finish our weekly maintenance reports before the morning supervisor gets here." Without waiting for a reply, Marcus turned around, slung his heavy iron pry bar over his shoulder, hooked his aluminum toolbox with his free hand, and trudged back down the corridor, leaving the ruler of the Orion Trade Federation staring after him in absolute, worshipful awe.